Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm a former Boeing 737 pilot and a member of the PMDG 737 tech team. Welcome to tutorial number 2 for the PMDG 737 in Flight Simulator 2024. In today's tutorial we are picking up right after tutorial number 1, and that means we have just powered the airplane up, we've done the flight deck safety inspection, and the next thing would be to analyze our flight plan, set up the electronic flight bag, and start loading the airplane. So let's go ahead and do that just now. So the airplane, as you can see, is powered, and the next thing we are going to do is to move into the electronic flight bag. Now, if the EFB screen is off, you can bring it alive by pressing the PMDG button down here. The first important thing for us to go into is the electronic flight bag app, and if you have not already filled out the options with things like your SimBrief ID down there, then it is recommended to do that right now. Also note that at this time I do recommend a Navigraph subscription so that you can get an up-to-date nav database as well as the Jefferson charts for your flight. When everything in the options is filled out, let's press the Request Data from SimBrief button, which is going to uplink your latest SimBrief flight plan into the electronic flight bag. We can also select the Navigraph en route charts down here, and you do have a couple options, like for example bringing up your alternate routes down here, or bringing up your expected altitude profile. Now, personally I do not like to use those, I normally just use the en route screen. From here you can also get your weather. So we can see we've got a QNH of 1017 down here, which we can already set on our flight instruments. So 1017 is set, and we make sure that that's set on our colleague's side as well. From there, let's move on into checking our flight plan. That's the second tab over here. I am using the Ryanair format for our flight plan, which you can select in SimBrief. Now, when checking our flight plan, we always start from the big picture to the smaller picture, so going all the way down into the en route charts. So you do have the general route overview, which you should be fairly familiar with after already creating the flight plan, and then you got the significant weather chart. On here you're checking for anything that might cause disruptions to your flight. For example, we do have some CBs, so thunderstorms, in this area over here, which may be a reason to take some extra fuel if you have to circumnavigate them. But always remember that by default you have at least 5 minutes of contingency fuel in there anyway, so normally that is more than enough. Now, once we have made ourselves an idea of the big picture of what's going on, let's move on to the next smaller step. So from the large weather, we're now going to the airport weather that we've got a little bit further up in the flight plan. So we can see that our departure airport Cologne-Bonn has southwesterly winds and no other weather phenomena that would have an impact on our flight. Our destination airport in Palma de Mallorca likewise has good weather conditions. We can see that our general wind forecast is 060 at 6, which is going to be relevant when checking the expected runway later on, because always remember that if you have to fly to a runway that is further away or that has a longer approach than the one planned in your SimBrief route, you may want to take some extra fuel for that. So we can see today we've got 060 at 6, and it's going to become 160 at 8, so it might become runway 24 for our arrival. We generally have to see about that for the approach. Now, going on from there, next up we check our alternate airport, and over here we can see temporarily from 0 UTC to 0900 UTC thunderstorms in the area, which kind of matches the significant weather chart that we've seen as well. Now, knowing that, let's go up and check our arrival time, which is 13:30. So if it was within plus minus 1 hour from the forecast time, then we would have to take those weather phenomena into consideration. However, that is not the case today, since that ends at 0900, so that should basically be over already. Now, with that, we know that the weather both at our arrival as well as our alternate is good, and now we can go up into the flight plan. If you're flying for a low-cost carrier, some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about now is probably not going to matter. If you're flying for a conventional carrier, then some of that may matter. So we can have a look at our departure time. We can estimate, are we going to be able to make this departure time? So 11:10 right now, or 11:10 scheduled versus 10:30 right now, that's 40 minutes from now, we should be able to depart on time. And we can see up here that this is actually going to lead to an arrival 15 minutes behind schedule. So legacy airlines may want to carry some additional fuel, while low-cost airlines would probably not care too much. But that's something to keep in mind as well. We verify our expected flight level and any possible changes that might happen to that, which may be a reason to take extra fuel. And with all of that in mind, we can now have a look into the planned fuel for our flight. We can see that the minimum is 8,779 kilograms. Now, in today's specific scenario, with a couple of the CBs forecast, we may want to take some additional. However, going down into the route section, we can see that we are planned for runway 06 left in the flight plan, while the wind is actually shifting to favor runway 24. Now, with that in mind, and looking at our route again, we can see that for runway 06 we have to fly all the way around the airport and start the approach, while runway 24 would be a straight-in approach. Now, for this reason, we do not need to take any extra fuel due to the runway being different from what has been planned. So overall, I do not see much reason to take extra fuel today. So looking into the fuel section here, 8.8 would be the minimum. We always round it up to the nearest 100 kilos. Then we can add another 100 kilos. So in case of today's example, we would take 8.9 tons of fuel. Now, if you're still learning to fly the airplane, things may take a little bit longer than what you originally anticipated. So I would recommend just to take a bit more fuel in the beginning, but once you are more familiar with the plane, you can just go down to the standard, like 8.9 in this case. So how much fuel would you need then? There's quite an easy formula. The 737 uses 40 kilograms of fuel per 1 minute flight time. So 5 minutes flight time, 200 kilos. 10 minutes flight time, 400 kilos. And that way you could easily say, okay, I want 15 minutes extra, so I'm going to take 600 kilos additional fuel. Likewise, if the weather would be in any way that a go-around is likely, a go-around followed by a second approach uses about 800 kilos of fuel in the 737. So that way you could easily determine how much fuel you may want to use. So for today's example, let's say that we want to take 20 minutes extra fuel, which is 800 kilos. So we take the standard 8.9 that we have down here, we add 800, making it 9.7 tons of fuel. Now, with that decision made, you could either decide to load the fuel immediately, or we go ahead and do the other things in the EFB app first, namely selecting our charts. For continuity reasons, let's elect to load the fuel immediately. So we go back to the main screen and then into the weight and balance menu. Down here you got the load plane from SimBrief button. If you do that, then the entire airplane is immediately going to load the standard SimBrief figures. However, you can also do a real-time live refueling of the plane. If you elect to do that, at the moment it's only available in the FMS by going into the FS Actions, Ground Services, and over here by going to page number 2 we can request the fuel truck. When we do that, we enter our desired fuel, so 9,700 kilos. We can put that down here, and going to the outside view we can see that the fuel truck is now arriving, and once it has hooked up to our airplane, you will be able to do a live real-time refueling down here. Note that I am recording this video prior to the original release of the aircraft, so there may be later features added, like the fuel panel underneath the wings, where you may be able to do that stuff live. If that is ever added to the product, I will do a separate dedicated tutorial on it. For now, we can see the fuel truck is attaching, and as soon as it has attached, the start fueling button is going to turn green, and then we can start doing a real-time refueling. Now, what's recommendable here, if you are flying and want to make it as realistic as possible, I do recommend to go into the PMDG setup options and simulation options, and down here on page number 1 you got the track oil, hydraulic and fuel usage button, and if you turn that one on, it's going to remember the fuel quantity you had on your last arrival, and then you can start refueling from there. So you can see I landed with 3.6 tons on my last flight. Now the start fueling button is green, so let's press that, and that way it's now refueling the aircraft at a realistic rate, which is approximately 20 kilos per second, or, well, with a little slower fuel truck, some 800 kilos per minute. So that's roughly the speed at which the airplane can refuel itself. Now, we'll just let this go, and as soon as the airplane has been refueled, we can move into the weight and balance app and press the load plane from SimBrief button, which is also going to set up all your passengers and your cargo. So that's generally how we can load up this airplane. Now, once that is done, we move back into the electronic flight bag and into the charts. Now, for this you need Navigraph charts to be connected to your airplane, which is a third-party product, so if you don't have that, you can skip this part. So if you do have Navigraph charts, let's press the departure button, we go to airports, and over here we are generally looking for the airport overview, which we can pin with that button over here, and we're also looking for the parking stands, which we can again pin with the button over here. Now, today we are parking in gate Bravo 30, which is located over here. So, knowing the real Cologne airport, we might very well get an intersection takeoff from Alpha 5. So, how are we going to know what the takeoff run available from that intersection is? Well, we can get that from the airport info and takeoff minimum chart, which I would recommend to pin at this point as well. We can see over here, runway 13 left from Alpha 5, we got 3,587 meters of takeoff run available. Now, once we know this, we can either finish up the charts by going into the SID and selecting whichever SID we need, which we can look up in the flight plan. So today it is the Nürbenich 3 Papa departure. So let's go ahead and find that one. Nürbenich 3 Papa is on this chart down here, so let's pin that as well. Or you could straight away go into the takeoff performance calculation, which we can do now. So let's go into the performance tool here. We've got Cologne Bonn. We can select the runway over here, which is going to be 13 left for our departure. Now, we do want our units in meters. You can generally change the units by just clicking on them over here. And now we need our runway length that we've just gotten from the airport info chart. So going over to the pinned charts, we can take our airport charts, airport info, and now we know that runway 13 left from Alpha 5 is 3,587 meters of takeoff run available. So let's go ahead and select that 3,587. So we simply click in here and then we can type with our keyboard. Now next up we need our takeoff weight, which we can either get from the flight plan or from the weight and balance app. But always note that this needs the plane to be loaded through SimBrief first. So right now we are still refueling our airplane in real time down here. So you could just go ahead and type all that stuff manually. So 189 passengers. Then we could insert our fuel, which today is going to be 9,700. But when you insert that over here, you can see the airplane now immediately loads up the fuel figure down there. So load plane from SimBrief, insert the fuel that you want to take, so 9,700. And now we got the correct weight, which is 69, rounded up, 69,200. So takeoff performance, weight 69,200. Then we need the center of gravity, which we can again get from the weight and balance app. So takeoff CG is 24. and we are going to insert that over here. Now, next we need our weather. You can just use the import weather button, which is immediately going to import the weather that you currently have in your flight simulator. Or we could go ahead and request META through our airplane's data link services. So since fueling is complete, I'm going to release the fuel tug. So let's go to Menu, Data Link, ATS, and ATIS. And over here I'm going to request our departure ATIS from Echo Delta Delta Kilo. Select an ATIS source, which is going to be VATSIM today. Now we can press the ATS send button. Now, going back to return, we will eventually get that in our ATS log. As soon as the data link message has arrived, we will see either an ATS or a COM message. As you can see right now, we're getting COM because we are receiving an ACAS message on our ICAS. And then we can just go down here, view ATS message, and that is the weather that we have just requested. So Cologne information Bravo, wind 130 at 10, slightly variable, few clouds and temperature 7, QNH 1016. Now we can see that this ATIS has been generated by PMDG using VATSIM data. So this is not an official VATSIM ATIS, but it is simply a generated one using the PMDG systems. Okay, so what do we have now? We got a wind of 130 at 10, but we can see it is slightly variable between 090 and 150. We generally want to calculate with the most conservative wind, so 090, because that is the greatest difference from our runway heading. 090 at 10 is the most conservative wind. So let's go ahead and enter that. So we got 090 at 10 knots. We remember the temperature is 7 degrees and the QNH 1016. Now, we should keep the thrust rating on optimum, anti-ice on if required. It is required when the temperature is plus 10 degrees Celsius or less and there is visible moisture. Today, we can, by a simple look outside, see that all of that is rather high altitude stuff. So we do not really need our anti-ice for today's takeoff, but we could consider turning it on already. And the air conditioning system is turned on, the runway is dry, and the runway's data is automatically loaded up here. When all of that is checked, hit calculate, and we can see that this is going to give us our takeoff data. The important thing that we want to take away from this is that we are not getting any error message that would indicate that we are above the maximum possible takeoff weight. Likewise, you can already do the landing dispatch here as well, and for this we are simply going to select Palma, let's say runway 24 left, the aircraft always going, we should always calculate flaps 40 and import the weather down here. We are also going to turn this to kilograms. Now we hit calculate, and now this tells us the maximum landing weight that we got for today's landing, which is 66.4 tons. So as long as we expect to land below this, we are going to be absolutely fine. Those are the two types of calculations that we need to do in the electronic flight bag here during our setup. So to summarize this tutorial, in the electronic flight bag app, we are going to import our flight. We are going to check our flight plan and decide the fuel quantity to take. We are going to prepare the charts that we need for our departure. And then we are going to load the plane through the weight and balance app. And we are going to do our takeoff and landing dispatch calculations through the performance tool. Last but not least, you can go to ground operations, and over here you can control all kinds of different stuffs. For example, we can open and close the doors. The same goes for the cargo doors, which we can operate down here as well. We can operate all the PMDG ground vehicles. Note that these operate the PMDG vehicles and not GSX. And we can control our ground connection, so for example an air conditioning unit, ground power unit, and so on. Finally, we got the ground maintenance tab, and over here we can do things like refilling the engine oil or the oxygen. We can replace our tires and all that good type of stuff. And that concludes the setup that we've done down here. So I do hope that you liked this tutorial. Be sure to leave a like in the YouTube system as well. Comment to let me know if you've got any questions or if you want to leave feedback. And finally, subscribe if you're up for more. Thank you very much for watching. As always, like, comment and subscribe, and if you really love what I'm doing on this channel, I would appreciate a small donation through the Buy Me Coffee link in the video description below. Thank you for watching, and I'm looking forward to see you all again on the next one.